Rory, thanks for joining me today. As you're aware, as I'll have spoken to you, the whole point of these talks are, I guess, is asking and answering as much as we can that one question of what it means to live well as a creative in the world today, which I think has different connotations and levels to it, particularly today, mid-COVID. But yeah, I'm delighted to be joined by you. I've been sort of tracing from a distance your career over the last 15 years, and I've always been quite inspired by it. On a geographical sense, it always felt to me like your career had a way of being very much from where you were, but also quite international. It seems to have those two things, which I've always tried to, in a way, to struggle to try and, do myself in some way. So for those of us who I guess aren't familiar with your work, you're a choreographer, a curator, a performer. There's much more beyond that, which we'll get into as well further down the road. But I thought it might be interesting if you give us a sense of your journey, just geographically as well, starting in Cork with training and where you sort of went with your art form. Because I know that you're currently living and based in an offshore island, Cape Clear off the coast of Cork. So it feels like that's been quite a journey. So yeah, what has that been like? Where have you started? Where have you gone to? And where have you now returned to?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for having me. Yeah, nice. I'm going to try and track back. So I'm from Cork City in the south of Ireland, Ireland's second city, and grew up there and kind of, I guess, started thinking about art and theatre was kind of my background. We were really lucky. We had quite an incredible like youth theatre in the city, ran by two fantastic women, Geraldine O'Neill and Emily Fitzgibbon. So I kind of came up through that rank or through that track, kind of youth theatre and youth arts in the city. And theatre was really the focus, and that followed through then into like my undergrad in Cork. It was in drama and theatre studies, and as part of that, as part of like many programs, we were sent off into the professional world on an internship, and that was the first big jaunt abroad. I somehow managed to get a place shadowing one of the directors at the Stella Adler Conservatory at NYU in New York. So I spent a summer there, becoming more and more alienated by actors and decided, okay, actors, they're an interesting bunch of people, but then started to meet dancers and more kind of folks that were working more with the body rather than with text. And that kind of lit a fire for me and sent me on this road into dance and choreography. But I suppose it's maybe an interesting thing about me was I didn't have this kind of formal dance training. I didn't have the kind of, I guess, a lot of the technical language, but I had this kind of theater kind of transferable knowledge. So yeah, so when I came back, I found an incredible choreographer who was based in Limerick at the time. And he had a company called Dagda, and they had this professional mentoring program. So I went and spent a year with them, developing my own work. And that was kind of the first time kind of really starting to consider myself as a maker, but then also spending time with members of the company and starting to like work more and more with the body. And that was the kind of transition then into choreography as like a discipline or working in dance. And yeah, after some time in Limerick and some time in Dublin, economic crash, got priced out, started to get interested in things further afield. So moved to Berlin and had like a really rich 4 years in Berlin, working with a lot of different people, collaborating. That's an amazing city to kind of cut your teeth in, I guess, as an artist. And I was quite lucky. I had a lot of, I guess, it's a hard city to hustle in because it's not a very rich or well-to-do city, and it's very saturated as well in terms of the amount of people making work there. But I was quite fortunate that I started to get gigs abroad. Like, so I would have been living and making in Berlin, but touring a lot internationally, and that took me into the kind of Nordic and Scandinavian countries, and to the States as well. So then I was back in the States, this time on the West Coast, collaborating with a choreographer there, Keith Hennessy, and a bunch of kind of emerging or earlier career artists there that he was collaborating with. And that was a kind of big eye-opener as well in terms of working from more of a queer perspective and working in a more kind of queer community context. San Francisco, where did I go then? I spent some time in the Bay, and that's been an ongoing thing. So for the past, I don't know, 8 years, I think, back and forth between Europe and San Francisco. That's really kind of like a home away from home for me, creatively and kind of personally. And then things I kind of hit like all the things I wanted to do in Berlin, and I was on the U-Bahn one morning, and I was just kind of noticing that I had been speaking German for a couple of years and had kind of forgotten a little bit my own language. And I felt this kind of draw home, the call home, I guess. And I moved back home from Berlin to an Irish-speaking community, so a Gaeltacht that's here on an island. It's about an hour offshore, called Cape Clear Island, or Ilan Clara. And I've been here for, I think this is my 4th year here as well. So I kind of shifted my base, shifted my practice, started making work in and through the Irish language, so bilingual work. Been here since, been traveling from here, so the kind of same situation, making work here and then touring it internationally, and then COVID hit, so all that's dried up for now. But actually, not to be, I guess we're finding new ways of working in response to that as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. Unfortunately, my family and close circle have remained well to date. So it's not all doom and gloom. I'm trying to remind myself of that. That's what I'm saying.
I think
I've zipped around. I've been around, but I guess it's about I am busy with place and home and identity. So these things are really on the cards for me. So I think that's been definitely on the table.
I mean, it sounds amazing just to hear it. It sounds very much like it's been quite an intuitive process, the way you describe going to New York and alienation driving you towards this physical world of theatre, and where that's led you in different places. And I think intuition seems to be something that people spend a lot of time and attention to very early on in careers, but often kind of forget a little bit further on. And it sounds like you've managed to maintain a good ear, even on the U-Bahn, when it's been saying, go home and think about this. We talked a little bit before about professionalism and the title professional. And so what I'm going to ask in a second is, when did you sort of intuitively know that you wanted to go and practice art for money? But I wanted to sort of open up a little bit with the idea of professionalism. So it can have different connotations and different feeling for certain people. What is it? What's the use of it? Or what's the use of it for you? Do you think it's a useful term for us to use in relation to artists?
Yeah, I think we're really in a moment of reckoning with it, because I think a lot of the structures around, the market of art or the presentation of art are under criticism, and rightly so. So I think there has been a move towards a kind of professionalization of the field or of creative industries or creative ways of thinking. But I think it has to be married, or maybe it's something I'm busy with, or art that I like or artists that I admire are thinking about. What's best practice, of course, because there are important things about how we want to respect and work with dignity and in consensual ways with each other, I suppose. But I think there's been a kind of deficit incurred as well, or a kind of I think when I think about professionalism, I think about the gifts that professionalism might return. And actually, I find a lot of those are lacking. So then I'm not really busy so much with all the aspects of it. I don't know if that makes sense. I think like, yeah, go on.
It does to a degree. What's coming to my head actually is the sense of, I think, what I heard you talking about professionalism, it's a nice idea in that, well, maybe this will bring back a professional wage and a professional experience of value and how I'm respected. But quite often what came to my mind is the idea of, certainly for a lot of actors, I think professionalism to a degree means how well I can fit into the structure of the professional world, like a cog in a machine. The more professional you are, the easier it is to be slotted into something. Whether it felt a little bit to me that you were saying that kind of professionalism, or the artists that you kind of were interested in weren't that interested in fitting into that degree. I mean, that's what in my mind came up. Is that sort of similar to where you were with it?
Yeah, I guess. I think like, I suppose kind of going back to the kind of artistic or the conceptual work that I've been doing, I think like I work a lot with risk and with like, like how do we engage with risk or complicated spaces to move towards like more complex interactions or happenings or events. And I think that professionalism is also married with the kind of health and safety culture and a move towards correctness, like political correctness or institutional correctness. And I think like, although I want to be moving forward those conversations and those practices, I'm also interested in kind of applying pressure on them to see like what they're actually producing, you know. And like I can give an example of working with fire or blood or cut glass or making a performance that happens, you know, by a lake at dawn that requires the 150 people in the audience to get up at 5 a.m. and cross the city. These kind of things you know, you have to kind of apply pressure in order to make them happen, because they happen outside the kind of well, we should all have a nice dinner before the 8 o'clock show, and the show lasts 40 minutes, and all we're expected to do is like sit quietly in the dark and then maybe think about it afterwards. So yeah, I think like, and then I think also the kind of move in terms of the market or the institutional professionalism requires that a lot of freelance artists you know, dedicate hours and hours and hours of their time to administrating their work without being remunerated or paid for it, or without support to do that. So I think there's I feel a lot of time wasted in terms of time that could be spent like in the studio, for example, or in practice or in collaboration with others. So there's a kind of course, we're always moving towards like professional like standards and trying to work within them, but then there's also kind of lack on the other side where, it's not just about wage. I think it's more kind of like holistic kind of care for the precarious worker, because it's like I don't kind of think either that arts or creative thinking or making is a kind of vocation. Like I don't feel like I have a vision. I don't feel different to other workers. It is very much a kind of a job and something that we produce things. So yeah, it's just a kind of complicated space that I'm always, I guess, it feels slippery. So, but I operate inside it for sure, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a little choice, but to operate within it to a degree. And it definitely resonates, the idea you were saying around professionalism and risk, especially in theatre. Professionalism can often just be a sort of a limitation. We define what theatre is and what art is, and therefore you have to keep within it. And any pushing around the boundaries is, well, it's not professional, so we'll not go to your Dawn Lake experience because we can have a meal beforehand. But just to take it back.
Just to say, Andrew, that was a sold out run, that show. Just
I have no doubt. But what then, if any, because quite often I think there are a lot of obstacles for some people beginning that can really just make it an impossibility. Quite often we forget about the obstacles at the beginning with the obstacles we're currently facing. We're like, oh, well, it's particularly hard at 38, 39 to go and do this, but we forget about the earlier stuff. So for you, what, if any, were the obstacles to this path of, I will continue this theatre exploration? You know, going to university and that point, were there any obstacles up to then, either in your community or family or in any way, even just within yourself? What were, if any, the obstacles at that point?
There's a kind of acceptance that I suppose that you're not that you're going against the grain, or that like you're not pursuing a kind of like normal track towards, I don't know, like a mortgage or financial security or whatever it might be, you know, like kind of whatever's the track in your family or in your community. So I think there's a moment that happens there where you, sometimes it's tied around the kind of choice to go into further education specific to the field or the discipline you want to work in, or sometimes it can be after that when I guess you're kind of at work or starting to take gigs, when you realize that you're like, oh wait, like the bank won't talk to me or something like that. But so there's the kind of there's that moment, and then other obstacles. Yeah, I mean, I'm very privileged in a lot of ways. You know, I'm a white gay man. I'm probably one of the luckier like types. And so I didn't. Yeah, I had a lot of support, like from people in the field, who gave me fantastic opportunities. And reflecting on that, I think it's important to kind of name it as well now, and like say and be at kind of peace with that, but then also to offset it with the choices that I make now, you know, and who I want to support. And yeah, I think, like I said, like I had a lot of support as well from family at home, but we weren't well off or anything, kind of like typical kind of middle class kind of Irish background. They would have preferred maybe for me to go into something in civil service, I don't know, or like I said, yeah, law or something else. But once I had made the decision, they rode in behind me. So I had kind of support from home, and continue to, like, there's still mad errands that I send my poor father on to collect like some strange material or something for me, or doing airport pickups and runs for dancers that I'm flying in or something like this at ungodly hours. So that all continues. Still going. What obstacles did I have? I guess the main obstacle I can reflect on is that I kind of grew up or came up in this moment in Ireland where everything seemed very possible. And we had Celtic Tiger, and there just seemed like endless money coming from ATMs. And it was a very inflated kind of time. And I think my generation, or our generation, kind of benefited from the kind of like inflation of the ego of that a little bit. And then after, yeah, kind of during university or after university, the crash happened, and then all the resources and infrastructure just were taken away. So I feel like I had a little bit of foot on the ladder, like I had my foot on the first rung of the ladder, but the ladder kind of disappeared above me. So then I think that also motivated or kind of demanded then that I look abroad, and move away to work and to live. And there's a lot of positive things about that, but I also look back on it now and think, oh, it's kind of wasted in a way some years that I could have been here, you know, working and living at home and making work at home. So that was an obstacle for sure, and a kind of gift in another way. Not all bad again, but it was certainly a big thing. And I guess now with the COVID-19 thing and the uncertainty that's starting to bubble up around it, I feel like, well, I have this experience and this kind of like knowledge from that last recession, and maybe I can kind of apply some of that learning from it. I mean, we don't know what we're looking into, and it'll probably be much more severe, but yeah. So there's challenges, but you learn from them as you go, I think.
I think it's a very common thing that you mentioned there around, I think at the point at which people decide to really, go on that road of, I'm going to go and do this art form, there is an acknowledgement that I'm now going to be on the periphery of society. Banks won't talk to me. And there's a sort of kind of agreement that I'm going to be in that space to a degree. I wonder, quite often a difficulty that can arise for a lot of people are their expectations not being met early on as to what their career should look like. Because there are expectations, I think, for most people on a beginning as to what this might look like. And it sounds like for you, whatever expectations might have been there at the end of university, with the Celtic Tiger being whipped out of there, were suddenly just taken. And so at that point, what were your expectations of your career going forward? How were you seeing it, or were you not seeing it and dealing with it on a very day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think it was twofold, because we had also just had the European Capital of Culture in Cork. So like, I kind of saw like kind of young professionals, like young theatre makers and dance makers and visual artists in my city, kind of with these amazing budgets and making these amazing artworks. And then the legacy of that, like in the years after that project, all that infrastructure disappeared as well, and they all went to Dublin or went wherever they went. And then Celtic Tiger thing kind of happened as well. So I guess I kind of expected foolishly at the time that I would walk out of university, and that like me and my friends would form the kind of like shit hot theatre company, and get like massive grants, and we'd just be set up and it would be great. And then it's kind of like, what, where, how do you write a grant? Like nobody teaches you that at university, or that you'd even, so those kind of things, like, there was a steep learning curve with all of that as well. And I guess it's like how you diversify your inputs as well, like not just monetary inputs, but like how do you feed yourself creatively? Who do you want to surround yourself with? What challenges do you want to encounter and things like that? So I guess I probably thought it was going to be more plain sailing, because we were kind of told everything was going to be plain sailing. So I'm glad of it in a way, because life isn't like that. So better to have gotten it out of the way early on.
I love those. Well, yeah, it felt like you sort of embraced it, or you were hit over the head by the world pretty early on to say that things are drastically not going to be. It wasn't a slow process. We slowly realized we're not going to make the shit hot company straight off. But I love those sort of slightly more holistic questions that you then begin to have around, well, actually, who do I want to be surrounded by? What are those other contexts that I want my sort of experience professionally or in the world to be like? I wonder if it feels like this. I mean, in my mind, I imagine the jump from Cork to Berlin to be quite a big one, or maybe not. In my mind, I imagine it culturally to be quite different. But it's from what I've also heard from other artists that actually, an artist I know referred to it as being a lot like Galway in the 80s when he first went to Berlin, in that, there's a lot of similarities. But I wonder for you, I think another obstacle a lot of people tend to face is they would leave university or training with one idea of themselves, of who they are and the kind of work they want to make, and can deal with it can be quite challenging for that to change, because if the circumstance dictates that actually they need to change what they're doing professionally, where they live or where they go, that might involve having to think about themselves a little bit differently. And that can be a very uncomfortable experience. And so it feels like you have had quite a few of situations where it would have demanded a big change, whether when going to Berlin or even when coming back, this idea, well, what kind of artist am I? Who am I? How do I match my sort of sense of self with what I now need to do professionally in order to maintain that? And yeah, I wonder, what were those experiences that demanded you change a little bit of how you saw yourself to carry on?
Yeah. I think like, because I was moving a lot and presenting kind of internationally a lot, like North America and Europe and kind of in Asia as well lately, like the thing I had to reckon with was this idea of Ireland and the Irish artist, and maybe like our canon, you know, and the kind of like great writers and the kitchen sink dramas and things, versus the kind of like contemporary like experience, like that what was happening actually, like actually happening at home in Ireland, and how to have a conversation with it, like, so working, you know, I don't want to say like in community context, because I think that's also kind of like the state and professionalism kind of identifying, but I guess as artists, like how do you respond to the housing crisis, or to the economic crisis, or to, you know, the crisis in the national psyche about Irish people's bodies, for example. So versus this kind of like romantic idea of like kind of, you know, Celtic mysticism or Yeats or Joyce. So there's kind of like that was kind of challenged, the kind of like, what does it mean to be Irish? And then when you claim it and you take it, and you're also kind of maybe being marketed as young Irish and queer or whatever it might be, how do you make your peace with that then? So yeah, it's like questions of also of like nationalism with a cap, or like with a little n, not a big n. Yeah, because we're like, yeah, I think we forget we're also like a country in our adolescence. So like we're having kind of those tantrums and spats. So, and I think it is like the artist's job to kind of witness and then make visible things that are like kind of kept a little bit invisible or on the side or not discussed, you know. So that's certainly been what I've aimed to do with work, rather than kind of putting on nice shows with nice girls in floral dresses, or something like that.
Which,
yeah,
you know,
I don't know. Does that answer your question?
yeah, well,
So,
it's just an exploration, really. I can't imagine there's a specific answer, and if there was, I wouldn't know what it was. So I can actually explore, but it sounds like that you have been eager to explore, you know, that small letter nationalism, but all of it, all of its filthiness, as well as all of its remnants of Yeats, and that there's a sense of, as an artist, wanting to reflect all of that. Another thing that sort of came to mind when thinking about this talk beforehand is, for some artists as well, there might be a sense of, well, I know place is very important to you because you've already mentioned it, and I know that there's sometimes as an artist you are heaved out of the place in which you feel like you need to be professionally. So I know quite a few artists obviously being forcefully ejected economically from Dublin as a centre and moving out. And then the struggle that people would have around, you know, and it's a similar conversation happening in London around, well, if nothing's happening in London, why live there? You could go anywhere. And I in my mind picture you to be an extreme of that, being on Cape Clear, going, you know, I'm now going to base myself on this offshore island, which doesn't have an arts centre, unless I'm wrong, but it's a growing artistic community, I'm sure, there. So what change did that require of you? Was it something you already felt like, well, actually my work is so independent anyway and easily movable and goes with me, that actually it's not going to change much? Or what were there some changes that demanded once you found yourself on that island?
Yeah, I think because you know, the community here, it's like in winter maybe max 100 people. So it's a very small community, and I think yeah, then you become accountable in a very different way. You know, it's not a faceless audience. It's, you become reliant on different like expertises also, like here on the island, you know, if you want something built, then you need to talk to the carpenter, or, you know, and it's very, I guess, yeah, then living in a context like this, yeah, that's kind of like an I would say accountability. Your work is much more enmeshed in the day to day, I would hope, or it becomes enmeshed, like things people show up in a very different way. So this idea of like how to reach community, which I've also had the experience of in showing in big houses or in the kind of more traditional theater context in big cities, always trying to reach this like community that are outside, that are kind of unreachable. It's a very different dynamic and relationship here. And I suppose you slot the kind of arts and cultural life it's much more rich in a place like this. And then I don't think people here would describe themselves as like queer necessarily, but some of the ways of being, the ways of working with the land or with animals, or just kind of being in like a different relationship with the mainland, for different people, I would view as being very kind of queer in a way, in lots of ways. They mightn't identify that way. So for me, yeah, there's kind of an adjustment around that. And then again, the things that you respond to, or that you're witnessing, or that your work tries to question or engage with, they're very much more like the island kind of dictates itself in a different way. And then there is something about the periphery space. So like it's an offshore island, it's an hour off the coast, it's 2.5 hours from the nearest art centre, it's 5 hours from Cork City, where a lot of their infrastructure or resources are. So it is distanced in a lot of ways, but then it's situated in a very different network and connected across the Atlantic in a very different way. So since like coming here, my like practice and my relationships have been really opened up to like, you know, people living on other islands here and people living like offshore islands off Scotland. I've been in Newfoundland, Canada, the States, all like, so there's this kind of Atlantic thing that's happening as well, which I think is super interesting. So you're never really, you are peripheral or on the margins. And then this language project, which is also kind of a living project here around the Irish language as a kind of marginalized language, or that's very robust here as well. That's also kind of made to feel marginal from maybe the kind of center, but actually it isn't, because you're connected into this other network. So this kind of duality of being, which it suits me, because that's kind of, those are the kind of spaces I like to operate in. That's another
you make a great point there.
Long answer for you.
Yeah, no, you have a great point there around the idea that culture does seem to be sort of city-centric in some perceptions. And actually, whether you're on an island, Newfoundland or the Hebrides, you are in culture. And what occurred to me was, I know one of the barriers from working in a lot of big house theatres in London around community engagement is this idea of, well, we have the art in this pristine elite building. How do we let the people know about the art? And it feels like that obstacle's removed where you are, because it's not in a building in this elite place. It is completely responsive to the people around you and needs to fit in with that. There's not a building where it's trapped inside it. Yeah, it sounds great in that way. To do with, definitely from sitting in London and having a foot both in sort of English theatre to a degree and the Irish theatre scene to a degree, I was very much inspired watching the campaigning that was done, both by yourself in the independent arts world, but fighting for the rights there, and also the National Campaign for the Arts as well. And that work that somehow artists came together so cohesively, so quickly, to make change that worked on such a national level so quickly. It was quite inspiring and astounding to see. And it prompted my own head an idea that was around, because quite often there can be a competitive artistic community, or to some degree, because of the structure in which grants might be offered or places might be given, there can be a sort of, we might not be as interdependent as we could be. And so I wonder, from your experience with that, what's your sense ideally of how artists could be together and supporting themselves? Because there is this disparity a lot around how to relate to other artists, how to relate to their industry, their country, and it can be in conflict quite a lot, and it can stop a lot of collaboration, I think. So what's your perspective? What ideally would you say could be a state that artists might think of themselves and their peers?
Hmm. Yeah, we did a lot of organizing over lockdown, and fed into a lot of bigger organizing that was going on, like with National Campaign for the Arts here. I think like we're really fortunate because we have quite a good system. Like we have quite a decent system, I think. Um, and that's like through Arts Council and also through local authority bodies and through like all other different types of support services that are there. But I think with it, I'm not sure if it's the same for everyone, but I like certainly feel a certain sense of like civic responsibility. So I understand my work like situated inside a kind of like civic kind of world, um, where like I have a responsibility because I'm in receipt of taxpayers' money, you know. And so then if I hold myself to that account, or try my best to hold myself to that account, then I also have to hold the powers that be, like that are facilitating that transaction, to the same account. And I think because like, yeah, I don't know, it's because like the festival ecology like is so rich and so strong here in Ireland, and maybe because we're a smaller kind of population and people are more connected socially and personally, there's a lot of strength in that. There's a lot of problems with it, of course, but there's also a lot of strength. So we can, it's easy um to activate, and it's easy to connect. um so I think just like if I imagine like what a better way of working would be, I think it's like, I don't know if we're realizing that like whether it's around equality and diversity and human rights, or whether it's around issues around working conditions or pay for artists, or I think it's capital that's the problem, that's working on all of us, this like capitalism thing. And I think the intersections of all of the different problems, be they like around equality and race, or yeah, any of the things I've said, I think then if we can like tackle that, if we can tackle capital and how it's failing us, and how it's like it hasn't been so stark maybe since the 2008 crisis, that it's so blatantly failing as a system, than it has been over the last 6 months, and probably will continue to over the next year or two. So then I don't think we can continue to stand over systems that are propping it up or that are broken as well. So I think when artists care, like they work they care about the spaces they work in, they care about the people who their work, you know, is made with and reaches. So I think when it becomes tense or something is revealed like that in a way that it's failing, people show up. And I think we have to just continue to show up and support each other and have more explicit conversations about the ways that it's not working, and get out of the way. Like I also have learned over the past couple of months that often I'm the problem. So I often need to just like get out of the way to like let another person or another a voice through. So listening, caring and listening, that's what I want to preach. They're my mantras, like how can we listen, how can we care more about what we're doing. But we also need to be resourced to do that. That's really important, because I think, yeah, I think a lot of the word resilience is being used a lot, like artists are resilient and the communities are resilient. And I think it's another way of dismissing the lack of care in the other direction, because it just says, oh, it's hard times, you'll be okay, just continue doing what you do and take care of these people over here who are missing something as well, or whatever, you know. So yeah, that's my dream anyway. Everyone come together, care and listen more.
That's great. I mean, this little triad of capitalism, caring, and listening. But what also strikes me is quite useful, because I think you make a great point there that artists just intrinsically care about stuff. Otherwise, you would not be involved. And I think naturally listen. And it sounds like you've got that awareness to step out of the way when you are the problem. But the demand on the organizations and structures that facilitate artists to have that same equality, so that same caring and listening, because I think that feels like what might be missing. And yeah, that hearing that resilience, almost argument being used quite a lot now around, well, you'll be resilient, you'll keep on making it, artists will keep on doing it because they do it anyway. In way of sort of, I guess, reflective summary of all the things that we've sort of been talking about and the different things that you've encountered as you passed through your own sort of journey so far. And we haven't had the time to go in what's next fully. It would be really interesting to get your sense of, because I think it's really interesting to see what's on the cusp of an artist's perspective, what might be coming next. But just to stay with the present briefly, what does it mean then for you to live well as a creative today? Given where you've come from, your 15 years of experience, what does it now mean to you to live well as a creative?
I think like this place I live in, like it definitely feeds me in terms of like feeling more holistically well. Like, um, what does it mean to live well as a creative? I suppose we're like also we're looking for balance. Like it's looking for not like work-life balance, but because I think those distinctions are also like a bit tired and we've kind of passed that in the world of work or the world of politics. I think to think that there's some sort of like precious like life time, it's like it's all enmeshed, it's all embedded. So then how do we find more balance and more stillness inside of all of that? Because you know the world of work has changed so much. So yeah, just it's like carving out time, stillness that can cultivate better space for you to listen to what's needed, what are you being asked. Yeah, wellness. It's a good question, Andrew. I'll think more.
It's an open question, but I mean, I think what comes across there for me, at least hearing you say that, is that it sounds like you were very much walking your own talk when it comes to finding time within a pandemic as an artist to give yourself the stillness to see what you're being called on to do, whether it be by basing yourself where you are on this offshore island, or by, I know that the walks that you have been literally taking over dozens of miles as well. So it feels like, it feels like you are walking your own talk to a degree there. And I think there's something about trying to maintain, sitting with just the vast unknown, really, and allowing it to happen and taking care of yourself as you do it. Is that somewhere in the same line of what you were thinking, or no?
Yeah, totally. I think like, I don't know, is it Berardi, this Italian, he says it's not a crisis of economy, it's a crisis of imagination. So like just thinking about like we're in a pandemic, we're in the COVID-19 pandemic, but we've been in a pandemic like with AIDS and HIV since like the 80s, you know, or like we're in a war, there's constant war, you know, and we're in a climate crisis, like, you know, friends on the phone sending photographs of San Francisco and it's like red dark at 10 o'clock in the morning. Like I think we can be very sheltered and bubbled here in like kind of Western Europe about, you know, because I look outside and it's like soft and green and raining all the time and there's no fire or drought. But I also like know that the sea is warming and so like, and yeah, then if this COVID-19 moment is anything but a pause to reflect on also kind of, you know, the very real thing in the world where like people are losing loved ones, but it's also this moment for us to think like, okay, well, you know, when we go back to normal again, am I going to just I don't want to be on the planes as much, like I can't go back to that way of working. So I'm trying to think about that in this moment, like what are the ways that I've been contributing to those crises, and how do I take myself as well, again, take myself, I'm also the problem, how do I take myself out of it, how do I shift my work so that it can still reach people and talk to people and be with people and touch people, but not contribute to everything being on fire all the time. So I think it's like, it's about trying to find this, if I can find, I find I'm most well if I have the privilege to sit and listen.
There's something really, I think, useful in that perspective you just say about, although you wouldn't like to think of yourself as being the problem, there's something really useful about that perspective because it allows you to influence change really quickly and instantly, right? How do I change my practice to not have San Francisco constantly on fire? I think that's a really useful perspective and an honesty to be questioning ourselves with. Roy Donovan, Gorov Mila Mahakut, thank you for
the road, Andrew.
Thank you for your time in the middle of this pandemic and in your own working day to step out and have this talk and these thoughts. So thank you
so much. It's been really nice. Thanks, Andrew.